yesterday's sort of tax filing day?
Yeah, so the IRS furloughed around 34,000 employees, which is nearly half of its workforce. But they are keeping people on to sort of process returns and process payments. So it is encouraging people to meet that deadline and file like they normally would. But there are some concerns about whether or not it has enough employees to do it in sort of a way where people will get their refunds on time. And I think there are some sort of outstanding questions about whether or not it's going to be a quick, smooth process. But it's encouraging people to file just like they would normally. The deadline's still here. Penalties and interest are still accruing like normal. So in that way, the gears are still in motion.
So the directive from the IRS, if I kind of am understanding what you're saying, is to continue business as usual. If you need to file taxes, please do everything you would normally do. But then on the other side, it's like, while you guys conduct business as usual, we don't know if we'll be able to, but we'll keep you posted, essentially? Is that kind of what I'm gathering?
Yeah, I mean, I think the IRS is obviously they're going to be confident that they can do the best that they can do. But if past shutdowns are any example, the last shutdown was the longest one in history, and it had a big impact on the IRS and what it was able to do. So I think the time of the shutdown, the length, is going to be the biggest factor into what sort of service taxpayers see this filing season.
Well, let's dig into that then. Can we go through some of the impacts from the last government shutdown on the IRS? Can you kind of walk us through a summary of how things went?
Yeah, I mean, the last one was a little bit different in that it went so deep into the filing season in January of 2019. So it was a bit more of like a mission critical moment for the IRS. But there were delays in getting refunds out on time. The agency initially was going to furlough a much even bigger percentage of employees than it did this year. And it had to start bringing people back so that they could get that job done. So right now we're not in the filing season, the main one. We're in the extended one. But I would say that the IRS it's been keeping on more people this year. So I think some people are more optimistic that it'll be able to provide enough service and process enough returns this year.
And keeping more people this year, is that a learning from their mistakes type of thing, or is that something else about the circumstances has allowed them to keep on more people?
So it's they were drawing from special funding that they received under the Biden administration, and they were initially going to keep on 100% of their employees, and they did that for the first week of the shutdown. But once they crossed past that threshold, they had to furlough people. But I think they're still using that funding to sort of keep on the people they have right now.
Okay, got it. And so obviously we talked a lot about those tax returns, getting those tax returns back to the people. A lot of people depend on that money. What are some other impacts that we could see with the IRS having such an operation with so many less bodies than they typically do? How else is this going to impact the people?
Yeah, so the call sites aren't going to be answering as many taxpayer questions as normal as they would during like the height of the filing season. So if you're going to call into the IRS with questions, it's very possible it could be harder to get an answer right now. But there are still customer service people working there. But yeah, the IRS is also they furloughed a lot of enforcement staff like auditors, exam employees, people that do that sort of that kind of work. So that's another thing to keep an eye out for. But yeah, it's they're just for context, they started the year with around 100,000 employees, so they are very, very very short-handed right now compared to their usual staffing levels.
Short-handed is the word I was looking for. That is the perfect way to describe their situation. Now, you said 100,000 employees. Do you have a more exact number of kind of how many they've lost to furlough?
Yeah, well, so the furloughs, it was around 34,000, but they've also lost, over 20,000 employees took the deferred resignation program this year. So that's just kind of like a combined, big chunk of people that they've lost through, the exits, the separations, and now the furloughs.
Yeah, that is that kind of a double whammy there. Now, is this, we've also, the current administration has said that if the shutdown continues, there will be layoffs to government programs. I'm wondering, are you privy to whether or not that's something that could impact the IRS? And internally, is the IRS worried about losing more people?
Yeah, so the IRS has started sending out reduction in force notices to some employees. It's a little bit unclear exactly how many employees still are going to get those, but they are following through with the Trump administration's
Hmm.
workforce cuts. But there are also some ongoing legal challenges. I think a judge in California is disputing these firings. So we've got a lot of moving pieces there, but it looks like they could lose more to that. Yeah.
Now, a lot of moving pieces is just a great way to define everything that's happening in regards to sort of, like you said, that combination of the government shutdown causing necessary furloughs and then the addition of the layoffs that may be coming and the layoffs that happened earlier this year. I'm sure it is a lot to handle. I wonder when it comes to this current situation, we talk about other essential workers, airline workers, TSA workers, things like that, and how while essential employees are still coming in, eventually, I guess, is the best way to put it, there are some PTO requests being put in. There are some more sick days being taken. The longer people are not getting paid, in theory, the less likely they are to keep showing up to work. Is that something that the IRS is concerned about or that they think could be a future impact?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's always a concern, especially with the longer the shutdown goes on. Furloughed employees, some of them at the IRS were being told that if they take too much time off, that might be an issue. So I think there's just a lot of confusion just among, what's going on and how long this is going to last. But I do think that's a concern for the IRS. Yeah.
Okay, and Ben, every question I ask you, you have such insight into what's happening in there. I feel like there's hasn't been a question yet where you haven't had at least some sort of like inside information that can help us. So I guess maybe I'll even ask this: is what is the what is the mood like internally at the IRS right now, if that's the best way to put it, or vibe for lack of a better word? Is morale low right now with everything going on at such a critical time in the tax season?
Yeah, morale is low. I would say, I'm sure it's like this across the government right now, but the IRS in particular has just kind of been through the ringer this year, staff wise. And people I've spoken to, unionized employees, they're just tired. It's been a lot, and their managers don't always know what's going on, so it's sort of just like, where are the answers? That's a big theme from what I can gather is just not having the answers when you need them. Seeing a lot of things in the media about your job and what's going to happen to your job, and you just kind of have to roll with the punches a little bit. So morale is definitely it's wavered, certainly.
Yeah, tired, not getting answers, and being understaffed is not a combination that anyone wants to see. But we also know, you know, they take their job so seriously that even with the current situation, we still talk about how they're going to be able to make a lot of things work and they're going to try to keep this system operating. I'm wondering, we talk about short term impacts with maybe some delays in people getting their returns and things like that. Are there any long term impacts that you could see come from this situation?
Um, I mean, are you talking about just the shutdown or just like the whole sort of
The shutdown,
year?
just the shutdown. I mean, who knows with further sort of short staffing and things like that. But just from the shutdown, are there long term impacts on the people of America that could come from the shutdown?
I think it really depends. Again, coming back to the length of the shutdown, the longer it is, the more chance there is for sort of spiraling, backlogs that create problems for the IRS and then in turn create problems for taxpayers. So I think it's hard to say how long term, an impact could be from a shutdown. I think the IRS is very good at sort of, readjusting to things once the dust is settled. They have a lot of systems in place to sort of try and get back to where they were. So I think there's reason to think that it's we just got to wait and see in terms of how long this shutdown goes. But hopefully the lawmakers strike a deal.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, in terms of advice to anyone who may be wondering, take every step exactly as you would if there wasn't a shutdown when it comes to filing your taxes and anything else you may need to do around that situation. That is the advice that we want to give right now, correct?
That is correct. Just the IRS wants people to engage with them and file your taxes, do your typical due diligence. Even though the shutdown is on, the taxes they keep going. So that's the message from the IRS.
Yeah, and something that we were talking about here in studio while we were preparing for the interview, and that I think is really reductive when it comes to how complex of a system that we are operating in, and how much of the government is still forced to function even under a shutdown. I think all of those things make this next thought again, just like a simplification of a system that is not simple at all. But when you look at the sort of the foundation definition of taxes, when you look at what they were originally meant to be, you pay taxes for government services. If the government is shut down and you're paying taxes, then by definition, you're paying for something that cannot be executed. Is that something that is I know that again, it's so overly simplistic for the situation that we're operating in, but it was like the first thing that entered my brain when we started diving into this interview, and I just wanted to bounce it off of you to see if that is a rational thought at all, and if anyone who out there who is having that thought, if you can bring them comfort in that, no, continue to pay your taxes, it will be, fulfilled in the long run.
Yeah, I mean, you raise a good point. It's certainly a strange kind of conflicting idea. I think it comes to, I mean, the government's whole idea is, we got to keep people on to protect life and property. And I think the IRS considers, revenue from payments like, tax payments to be pretty essential, even in some scenario like this. But, I can understand just the sort of confusion or just kind of concern, why am I doing this when it's not apparent that it's, the government's active. But that's just sort of how the IRS operates. But that is a good point. You raise a good concern there.
Yeah, I appreciate you indulging me on that. And of course, we all, we're all operating in this system. And to trust the institutions that are keeping it running, even in the face of great adversity, is part of what kind of keeps it running when it comes to the IRS and other things like that. So, everything that you've brought to this interview today has been so helpful. Your insight is really incredible into the actual inner workings of the IRS itself. Is there anything else that you want to add or anything that we didn't touch on that you think is important to express?
Um, no, and I think we're going into another week of the shutdown, so I think we're just gonna have to see what happens. But yeah, it's there's a lot going on. The IRS has a lot going on. Um, so, but no, but thank you guys for having me. This was great.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us, Naya. Do you have any questions for Ben before we let him go?
No, I think I'm good.
Okay, awesome. Mr. Valdez, if this continues, hopefully we can have you on again, or if any other news comes up involving the IRS or people's taxes, we'd love to have you on again. We've really enjoyed it. So thanks so much for
Awesome.
joining us.
Certainly. Yeah, thank you guys for having me.
Awesome, awesome. Have a good one, Ben. We'll talk to you down the road.
You too. Thanks.
All right, guys, that was Ben Valdez, a tax analyst for us and an IRS reporter for Tax Notes, joining us today to talk about this government shutdown has such wide-ranging impacts. Every day here on Live Impact News, we oftentimes will narrow it down to the dispute between Republicans and Democrats and trying to solve that and how that has shut down the government. But we also are able to explore situations like this, how your tax season will operate with the government shutdown. A few days ago, when we talked about firefighters who work on base and are federal employees and how this impacts them as essential workers who are now not getting paid. All of these things come into play and will continue to come into play as this shutdown stretches deeper into its third week now, day 16. Now, we obviously, as we have the last few days, we are going to have interviews from both members of the Democratic and Republican Party on this shutdown. We're going to give you updates on where things stand right now. Another vote was taken today that reportedly did not go through, so the shutdown will continue into day 17 tomorrow. But as we've done here on Live Impact News over the last 3 weeks, we're going to further explore where things stand today, and we're going to get those perspectives directly from the source, Mike Johnson and Hakeem Jeffries and other members of their respective parties.